Well, welcome everybody to our leadership seminar today about how to using love in work. And I'm here with one of my very favorite people in the world, Sherry Pudloski. Sherry is an expert in communications. She has a long history working in the pharmaceutical industry. We'll talk a little bit more about Sherry's credentials a bit further along in the program. So I'm going to jump in now and share my desktop. And we'll see if we can get the slides to appear correctly. So what place does love have at work? This is a question that we're going to examine today. And so I won't jump ahead too far to let you know what my particular position is. And Sherry has a fantastic story about her time at Pfizer that she's going to share with us about culture and its impact on performance. So as I mentioned, Sherry's the founder of SMP Communications. She's on the board of advisors. Tell us a little bit about JPGO, if I'm pronouncing that right, Sherry.
JPIGO, it's actually
JPIGO.
part of Johns Hopkins University, or an affiliate of. It's a not-for-profit looking at bringing maternal and child health into many countries in the developing world.
You've had an interest in women's health and in women in business for quite a while. Is that correct?
It is, yep. It's been a theme as a woman who showed up at a lot of meetings as with a lot of guys and not too many women. It's one of those things that naturally comes to you. Although I did lean into professions where there are a lot of women, like healthcare and communications. So when I was at Pfizer, we started this New York Women's Leadership Group. So there were about 8,000 colleagues working at the time in New York. And we wanted to make sure the women there had the opportunities to succeed in their careers that they were looking for.
One of the things we're going to talk a little bit about later is how women perceive leadership versus how men perceive leadership, and also how those perceptions overlap with what we look for in romantic partners. So I think that'll be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about that experience. Everybody knows me, so I'm going to skip over my slide about who I am. This is from the book 12 Steps to Manage Your Most Important Product You, Fortune's Path. And this is my definition of what love in business is. It's a passion to know the other, a willingness to sacrifice, honesty with courtesy, kindness, anticipation, and a fair exchange of value. I also think this is a helpful definition of love in our personal relationships, a fair exchange of value, for instance. There are times, I'll speak in my own career, where I've been in what was amounted to kind of an unhealthy relationship, where I was in a work situation that was not ideal. And I was putting in what I thought was my best effort, but not feeling a sense of reward for that effort. So before the program, Sharon and I were talking a little bit about what it means to launch a business. And one of the reasons I think why people launch businesses is because they're not feeling the love. There's been a lot of people who have launched businesses recently and are changed from the pandemic, which caused a lot of reassessing of what we want out of life. And we're going to talk a little bit more of that in a bit. Dale Carnegie probably says what I said in a much more elusive way, where he talks about in 2 months, you can become you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. This is a key element of sales and marketing communication, is that it's never about you or about your product. It's always about the audience that you're addressing and what their needs are. This is also true of leadership and practicing love in leadership, which is that you're trying to understand the people that you're working with and what it is that they need and how you can help them go about getting what it is that they need so they can do their best work. So by practicing that self-interest rightly understood of understanding someone's needs, so you can show your legitimacy and your understanding in a truthful way, but then help move them closer to what it is that they need. Because sometimes what people need is actually, as a leader, pretty easy to get them. Getting down though to finding out what it is someone needs can be a very difficult process, even if the solution sometimes is pretty simple. So this graph is from the St. Louis Fed. It shows the labor participation rate going back from 1948 to the beginning of 2001. Yeah, actually, excuse me, to the end of 2001. And the reason I have this slide up here isn't so much to talk about how the labor participation rate has changed, but to think a little bit more about how we spend our time. So if you look over, there's a dramatic increase in 1970, where a large number increase in labor participation rate happens. Why does this happen? Well, women enter the workforce in much higher numbers than they had since the Second World War. So let's take a look at some of the things which were going on at the same time as that dramatic increase in labor participation. Marriages per 1,000 people, 1948 to 2011, you can see that, pardon me, 2018, you can see that in the lower left. There's a pretty significant decrease in the number of marriages and the marriage rate in the US. There's also, over that period of time, a significant decrease in the birth rate. We've actually dropped below replacement level. We're having fewer than 2 babies per woman in the US. And the share of marriages ending in divorce has also increased since the 1950s. The graph there on the lower left shows by decade when a marriage occurred and whether the outcome of that marriage eventually was divorce. So we're making a choice to spend our time at work. And this isn't a bad choice. This is not meant in any way as a judgment against people working. We work for a lot of reasons. And one of the assumptions that we make is that, well, starting in the 70s, there's a large increase in inflation. And so people had to work to achieve a middle-class lifestyle required 2 people in a home to go out and work. That's absolutely true, but it's not the sole reason why we've gone out and the labor participation rate is higher than it was in 1948. So if you go back on the graph down there in the bottom, you can see in 1948, we had a 20% inflation rate in the US right after the Second World War, but our labor participation rate was closer to around 58%. And so here in 2021, our inflation rate is around 7 or 8%, and our labor participation rate is around 62%. So certainly there's been an increase in cost of living over that period of time. Wages have not kept track with an increase of cost of living over time, but we are doing this partially out of choice. So I'll go back to the previous slide. We have chosen not to have as many babies. We have chosen not to get married as much. We have chosen, in some cases, to have marriages end in divorce. So we have to look for love in places other than our family. We are looking for love at work. And I'm going to talk, and I don't think that is a bad thing. It's an amazing opportunity for us as leaders in work to provide love to the people we work with and to provide love to our customers. So the graph on the left, these are both from the Conference Board, is an aggregation of their research from 2011 to 2018. And what it shows is the correlation coefficient, how much of this variable explains changes in people's self-reported satisfaction at work. So about 70% of the variance for self-reported satisfaction at work can be attributed to how people respond to the question of potential for growth. That's an enormous correlation. A perfect correlation between 2 variables is 1. 70% of that variance can be explained by potential for future growth. It's enormous. So communication channels, recognition and acknowledgement, interest in work, performance review process, and supervisor all highly correlate with how people describe their satisfaction at work. What do those things have in common? They're about relationships. These are about, do I have hope that the relationship that I have in this organization will nurture me over time, will allow me to grow? Do I feel that I have open communication with the people who I'm here with in this organization? Do I feel recognized, acknowledged, I'll say loved and where I am? Is the work that I'm doing interesting and rewarding? Does the performance review process that I have help me grow as a person? These things are about relationships. On the right side, since that data went through 2018, I went and I looked at, well, what did the data do between 19 and 20? And you can see what things showed a dramatic increase in self-reported satisfaction. So a health plan, performance review process, flexible time, family leave, all of those things showed significant increases in how people said that they helped them at work. And then down on the bottom, interest in work, workload, recognition and acknowledgement, those things actually decreased. Now, one of the things that's fascinating to me about this is that even during the pandemic, our overall satisfaction stayed about the same. This is then why would our satisfaction stay about the same? Well, I think because so much of the meaning we look for in our life comes from work. If you go back at those charts around the labor participation rate, the divorce rate, the birth rate, so much of our focus of what we're trying to get out of our life is about our work. And it's devastating to feel like you're not satisfied with your work because so much of your life is poured into that. So I've talked a lot. I really want to hear from Sherry. She has a fantastic work history and she's a tremendous leader. And so Sherry, talk to me a little bit about the organizations that you've been in. Do you see this? Do you see people trying to find meaning from their work?
So, I mean, if you look at the trends right now, it's what all of the CEOs of the Fortune 500 have been trying to talk about the past couple of years when they declared what's the purpose of a corporation, which is not only to support shareholders, but also to support society, their employees, their customers, and other stakeholders. And so if a company can truly do that, you're defining a purpose at the top, so why it exists and what it's all about, what gets your employees up in the morning, and that's a really great starting point. But you can be working for the most amazing company that's curing cancer, and have had the honor to work for some of those kinds of companies. But at the end of the day, if the relationship that you have with your manager is not one where you feel you're able to bring yourself to that to that mission, and that you're able to fill your personal purpose, it's going to be a disconnect. And it doesn't mean that that manager's a bad person or that you are you're not good at what you do. It's really about finding the way to align what matters to you with the work that you do and finding that joy. Sometimes it's even just a change in frame regarding a person. There used to be a person that I worked with on one of my teams who just drove me crazy. And instead of just sitting there and scowling and being irritated during meetings, I had to say, what do I admire in this person? And what can I appreciate in her? And there was a lot there. She could execute plans better than anyone I know. She was on top of things three steps ahead of everyone else. And so by valuing that person, you can get to a really strong place in relationships at work that then create these more productive teams, because you're going to have energized people coming together to do good things.
I think that's a fantastic point about the importance of framing, and that it's possible to overcome a problem simply by looking at it from a different point of view. So this chart shows a little bit about, it's a summary of research done by Morning Consult about what men and women look for in leaders. And Sherry, you talked a little bit about what it means to be a woman in a leadership team. You've also worked for a variety of female CEOs as well as male CEOs. What is your opinion about these traits that Morning Consult identified? Which ones do you think are important?
So it's really interesting because I'm also right now getting my master's in education. I decided one of the things I wanted to do right now is go back and look at go back and do some studies. And we've been doing a lot about leadership reading and skills, and they start off often in studies in business and then move into the education space. And openness and frankness is one I think that's very top of mind. And I think it's what people want because they want to be received and they want to be appreciated. So it's a way to feel like it, you know, they participate in the direction of projects or the direction of companies or the direction of any organization that you're part of. There's also a bit around self-confidence, and I think some of this is seen if you are in a specific leadership position. So, but it's interesting here that that confidence piece is almost a given, and that more of it leans toward effective communications. So in my profession, one of the things that I've studied and looked at over the years is just sort of leadership behaviors, you know, I would say three quarters of them are related to being an effective communicator. And so, and if you're going to achieve your strategy, did you talk about it enough? Did people understand it? You know, it's, if you have an acquisition, why did you bring this group of people together? But then how are you coming together to, but as two organizations to be one? They're all about communications. And I think that that's a real asset that women tend to be more focused in that way. But I have seen some wonderful you know, male leaders that are also communicative. So I would, it's interesting to try to think about the differences between men and women. And what I find in the women leaders that I've worked with, they go through this curve, which is, I don't want to be known as a woman leader. I want to be a great leader, period, in and of my own right. It doesn't have to do with my gender. But then I was talking with a woman leader today at CVS Health, and she said, but what I realized is that other women want me to identify as a woman leader because that gives them a model and example. And so I had to, she said it was my own maturity curve where I had to get past what I was feeling about I've made it, damn it, to getting to this place of really as a leader, I am somebody that is there for other people, to emulate, to inspire, to support in their own journeys.
It's really interesting. It reminds me of, there's been a lot of athletes who have said, I'm not a role model. I got here, I'm an athlete, don't think of me as a role model. We don't get to choose if we're a role model or not. I can't go to my children and say, oh, don't look at me. You know, I'm no role model. I'm just your dad. You know, that I had a supervisor years ago who explained to me that she felt that being a supervisor, being a leader was a lot like raising kids. And when I first heard that, since I reported to her, I was offended because I thought, well, this means I'm her kid. But as I've gotten older and my kids have gotten older, I actually really like that idea of thinking about what would I do if the person I was working with was someone who I loved? What would I do if the person who I was working with was someone in my family? And I didn't have a choice. You know, we have a choice who we work with and who we don't. We don't have a choice about who's in our families. There's my Anna, my wife, and I just watched Belfast last night with our son Joe, and there's a scene in Belfast. You don't know the story. It's Kenneth Branagh's semi-autobiographical. He's a little boy, you know, in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. There's been rioting in his neighborhood. It's dangerous to live there. His parents are considering leaving and going to England. But he loves his neighborhood. He loves everyone. His mother loves the neighborhood. He has lots of friends there. Christmas time, they've gotten lots of gifts. End of the day, mom and dad sit him down on the couch and they say, well, we're thinking about going to London, to England, where dad works, and living with him. And Kenneth Branagh blows up. He's like, no, I love Belfast. I can't leave. Well, they didn't give him any context. There was no reasoning there about why this difficult decision needs to be made. And I think that's something that we'll do sometimes to our detriment in leadership, is we don't explain the circumstance. We don't say it's dangerous to stay. People are being killed in Northern Ireland. We're in a neighborhood where it's no longer safe. There's high unemployment, because we assume they can't handle these things. Have you had to share difficult information with a team, or how have you managed in your leadership positions, Sherry, when there's been some really hard facts to face?
I think there are hard facts to face in every day when you're in a communications position because because you're often the place where the problems come, whether they're around how do we're reorganizing and some people are going to lose their jobs. I think those are the hardest ones to face. Some may be challenges and legal issues. Others might just be bad behaviors of people within an organization. And as a team, you have to be very resilient. You have to be very trustworthy and not absorb this information personally as best you can, but be compassionate around the people involved and the impacts that it'll have on them. Sometimes it's almost like being separated out from the situation when you're dealing with high stress, high stakes issues on a regular basis. And then when it comes to you and it's your team being reorganized and or you leaving an organization, it really hits home that showing that compassion through those periods is incredibly important.
So this is a research here on the right that was published in Sex and Psychology in 2019, which was a survey of about 2,000 adults, men and women, as to what they were looking for in romantic partners. The men are shown in blue and women's responses are shown in green. The percentages are when these traits appeared in the top 3 traits that someone rated as what they were looking for in a romantic partner. So for women, the top traits were humor, intelligence, and honesty. And if you think about humor, intelligence, and honesty, those are like being communicative or having integrity. You could even say being open-minded. I think there's a relationship between what you laugh at and how open-minded you are. So what we're looking for are desirable CEO traits. And on the left there, that's the average of both men and women, how they responded to the morning consult. And what we look for in romantic partners are not that far apart. And so that, again, to me, is that these relationships, it's still about love, how we practice love, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's our romantic partners, it's the same thing. It's still trying to practice having a strong character, being a loving person, being a good person in all of these different environments. Now, they express themselves differently because there are behaviors that are very acceptable in a romantic relationship that are very wrong in a business relationship. But the core feeling, in my opinion, is still about love. Sherry, do you feel that? I'll just say, do you agree?
Well, I think, you have to be careful and make sure whoever you're talking to, Tom, understands where you're coming from.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I do think a lot of these traits that we're talking about are actually even viewed as skills these days. So something of, communications is a skill. Confidence is something, it is a trait. But it's also a requirement for some of these, for certain jobs, for sure. Being a team player and collaborative, it's something that is talked about significantly within the workplace. How do we help people come to their work with integrity? And we end up talking about these as values within an organization as well. So I do think at the end, I agree with you that at the end of the day, how you treat people is quite meaningful within the workplace, because that's how you get the best from them. I when I was getting ready for this event, I had posted on my LinkedIn, and a gentleman that I met when I was teaching, I was lecturing at a class at Georgetown that my friend Judith invited me to her class on leadership. And I met a young leader, Chase Spears, who's a public affairs officer in the Army. And he was getting his master's in communications. And he told a story in response to this conversation about how he gave some advice to a colleague. So he was talking to a friend who had a team of people, and this guy was really fretting, and he said, I'm going to have to let this guy go. I just don't see him having a future. I don't think he's going to be able to rise past where we are. And Chase said, well, have you told him that you loved him? And the guy stopped and he looked at him and he said, no, of course not. But he said, well, do you love him? And he said, actually, I do. I think he's a really great guy, and I don't want to do this, and I don't want him to leave our team. And he said, well, go ahead and do that. And then Chase bumped into the guy a year later, and this guy was thriving in the team. He was still part of it. And so it is really getting down to, no matter what relationship you're in, it's like expressing that love for somebody that's going to give them the confidence to be their full self and really get the most out of the work, out of the relationship, out of the friendship, out of whatever situation you're in.
So Nita Roderick, who is the founder of Body Shop, she's an English entrepreneur, human rights activist, and environmental campaigner, made a point about business itself is now the most powerful force for change in the world, richer and faster than most governments. What is it doing with this power? And I agree that business is a tremendous energy engine for change. It can be positive change or not so positive change. And so how are we directing our organizations, and what choices are we making with them? In my opinion, the business of business is love. Now, let's go back to that definition of love I showed at the very beginning of the program. This is also about self-interest rightly understood. This is also a fair exchange of value. So love doesn't have, in business, doesn't mean we're going to give everything away. It doesn't mean everything is free. It doesn't mean you get whatever you want. Just like in raising children, if my 4-year-old is choosing the menu for the birthday party, in my opinion, that's a mistake, because I'm giving them an inflated sense of their self. I am not guiding them in a way to be sensitive to the needs of others and how other people, like the grandparents at the party, what they might want to eat. Cheerios might not be their favorite food. And so we can't do this in work either and say that, well, just love means everybody gets what they want. It doesn't. That's not what love is. Sometimes love is going to that person who isn't succeeding on the team and saying, you will be happier elsewhere. This is not going to work for you. When we understand what your talents are, we understand what your values are, and that's not what we're doing here. And so you're always going to be miserable in this position because you're going to be trying to force yourself into a mold that you're not fit for. These 12 steps of love and business are about how these are practical ways to practice love in a business setting. So for instance, one of the first things I need to do as a supervisor or as an individual contributor is determine what I can and can't control. Because if I'm trying to get involved in things that I can't control, I'm going to muck those things up. I'm going to make other people's lives more difficult. If I focus on what I can control, then I'm directing my energies where they're going to have the greatest good for others and the greatest good for myself. So Sherry, you've seen this list before. I asked you to think a little bit about it. Is there anything on there that you wanted to talk about?
So I think the taking the intention of deciding what kind of leader you want to be is a really important step in a certain part in a certain part of your career, but it's one that you need to revisit on a daily basis because, or at least on a periodic basis, because it changes depending on where you are in your career. So when you're starting out, the kind of leader you want to be is you want to show that you're an eager participant in the team, that you have ideas, that you're able to bring things forward, and that you're able to work with others. And I remember early on in my career, I was in a situation where I was managing a team and we all had the same title. And so it's really trying to figure out, how do you lead by your influence when no one else reports to you, but you are together going to be stronger than you would be if each person was trying to do what you could do, and you probably couldn't even execute it individually. And so that's at one place. But then when you move on in your career and say, I was the chief communications officer at Guardian Life. The CEO then brought me in to help to rebrand the company. And so then I needed to be in a much more forward-looking, talking about what it is we stood for and bringing other people into that conversation and having them be able to express why they could be guardians for people. So we said everyone deserves a guardian. We sold life insurance. And so we were founded by 21 German American immigrants who couldn't get insurance. And so they bonded and created a mutual insurance company to take care of their families and businesses should things happen to them. So how do we become a modern day representation of that in the business that we had? So I really think that that's an important thing to reflect on an ongoing basis.
I love that. That's a great story. So speaking about that reflection on an ongoing basis, these are five questions that at Fortune's Path we use when we're trying to understand a problem and what the potential solution to that problem is. This is helpful for if you're building a product to go to market. It's also helpful for communication, for HR, for really any part of your organization that is tasked with understanding problems and then developing solutions for those problems. So it starts with just trying to get a rough definition of what is the problem. And a lot of the times we skip from that directly to solutions, or even not even to solutions at a high level, but the specific features of solutions. That is almost always a mistake. We have to understand who feels the pain. How important is this problem? How would they prioritize that? How do they feel that pain? What are they doing about it now? There's very few problems where someone isn't already doing something to address them. If you're in a market, if you're trying to go into a market where you say there's no competition, well, maybe you're going into the wrong market. If nothing is happening, if no one, there's no, there's nothing anyone's doing currently to address this problem, you might have found a problem that no one cares about. And it's very difficult to succeed in a market if you're trying to attack a problem that people don't feel any pain over and don't particularly care about. What's your better solution? This is where you're starting to get more into the features, the actual, what is our solution going to do? There's a concept in product management about jobs to be done, that the reason why we develop a product is because we need it to do a specific job. That's also true, not just of products, but of services as well, or of any system you're creating in an organization, is that there's a specific job, an outcome that it's supposed to achieve. That outcome is happening somehow today. That's what number 3 is about. But why is your solution better? And the last one That's what I just said. Why is your solution better than what they're doing now? This is where you get into proof points. This is where you get into things like piloting. This is where you get into your go-to-market strategy. It's where you get into how you understand your constituents, what their needs are, what their concerns are, and why what you're proposing is going to fit into the way they've defined the world without causing them a lot of difficulty of having to redefine what they do. Sherry, how have you used this rubric or questions like this in your work in communications?
So it's a really good framework, and I had some experience in the lean startup area too, which is you have an idea, but you have no idea if anybody else understands your idea of what the problem is unless you start talking to people. So back to that communications piece, I would say, looking at the situation, I think I'm in a fixer mode right now, in the work that I'm doing, where there are two teams that aren't coming together seamlessly. And I have the view of the team that I'm supporting, but I need to get more into the view of the other side. And I think that it's kind of everyone standing their ground, and as opposed to coming to that common solution, which is the business problem that we're all trying to solve, and how do we collaborate to make that happen, instead of be like, I do this part, then hand it to you, or we have to all live in the gray. And so I think I'm feeling that pain right now. When the team is feeling pain, that's time to get to a conversation quickly, or else you're just gonna spiral out of not having a client, or not having a job, or or moving on, or the person will go somewhere else to get done what you would like to get done with them.
I think, and sometimes in that situation you're describing, the worst thing is we just sit in our rut.
Yes.
Everybody kind of goes into their corner and they stew, and years can pass in organizations like that. A lot of organizations, as an organization grows, it gets a tremendous amount of momentum, and it can really have quite a bit of incompetence and still perform, because there's just so much momentum behind how it generates cash. But that feeling you're describing of we don't talk to each other, we throw things over the fence, it may take a long time, but ultimately that stuff does come home to roost. So this is a list of the recent list from Forbes of the most admired companies, Fortune, excuse me, most admired companies in the US. And Sherry, you have a terrific story about Pfizer. Can you tell us a little bit about the cultural transformation you saw?
Yeah, so full disclosure, have not worked at Pfizer for a few years. I left there at the end of 2019, but I worked there for almost 10 years. And when I first started, I guess it was 8, but when I first started, there was a transition in CEO. And he basically said, culture and our people are our competitive advantage. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds good, but let's see how that comes to life. And one of the things that was set up was this own it culture. And it was basically a culture of accountability, winning in the marketplace. So own your customers, win in the marketplace. No jerks was N, and no jerks was a direct relationship back to, hey, that previous administration. Impact, and then trust. And so the fact that I could still say this, that I haven't worked there for a while, means it did get hammered in. And what it did was it brought accountability back to the organization, so that everyone who worked there, whether they were the scientists who were spending years doing research, had an accountability to bring, bring forward medicines or potential medicines that were going to make an impact in the marketplace. They were going to solve a problem that hadn't been solved. They were going to be something that would create a value exchange that we've been talking about, Tom. And it wasn't just for the love of science and that something looked nice. And
Yeah.
so this deep building of culture brought with it this idea to invest in science. And I think that investment in science and investment in, at the end of the day, solving the problems for patients is what set the stage for helping Pfizer be so successful at being able to bring the vaccines to market when there was a science crisis, because that deepness of accountability went throughout the organization. The patient focus went throughout the organization, and the sense of empowerment that the people have at the company was able to be tapped in a way that just brought forward, something that is saving, a big contributor to the world's health. And so I just think how people interact and the cultures that are created can truly be real differentiators in business.
I've seen that I worked at Hellstream for about 8 years, and Hellstream's founder, Bobby Frist, used to talk about how shortly after they went public, which was right around the same time as the dot-com bust. It's a rough time to be a SaaS company, particularly, and back then people didn't use the term SaaS. And so Bobby would go talk to investors, and he had a corporate constitution. And he said, this was the one thing that made them different, is that he could show them, okay, these are our business values. These are our principles. This is our strategy in this one corporate constitution document. And we had a little, like you had Own It, we had iClip, and I can't remember all of what that stood for, but it was stuff like personal integrity, innovation, customer focus. And it was really, really helpful during a period. They went through tremendous growth while I was there. I got there, we were $3 a share. When I left, we were at 30. We'd gone from 60-ish million in 50, 60 million in revenue to over 240. And it was a really fun environment to be a part of. And a lot of that was that it made my job of prioritization so much easier, because I could go back to those set of core principles, and I could look at those and say, all right, this is how I make decisions. This is how I represent the company to the public. And all of these values, in my opinion, go back to love, because they start with trying to understand the other. They start with trying to see the market for exactly what it is, not what I wish it was, not what I wish that market would do, but what it really is and what it really values. And then try to understand, how do I fit myself in there? Pfizer, to me, is an amazing story for many reasons, but one of them is that it proves the tremendous capacity for good that business has. I think we tend to badmouth in all institutions. Government's bad, business. I'll just speak for myself. I will tend sometimes in lazy moments to badmouth.
You're not judgmental.
Only a bit. Anyway, it's important to remember that a lot of really fantastic things have come out of these organizations, and that they've done a tremendous amount of good for the world. I don't know about Netflix. Yes, it's made us happier, but it certainly hasn't had the same impact. It's really Pfizer is the one on that list that I can point to and say they have, Starbucks perhaps, but Pfizer absolutely positively has made a tremendous impact on the well-being of humanity. And a lot of businesses have that opportunity. So Sherry, we're going to talk a little bit about virtues. And if you don't mind, I'm actually going to go, oops. Oh, I missed anyway, I'm sorry. So we're going to talk a little bit about virtues. And on the left there is Aristotle's, a partial list of the virtues that Aristotle identified 2000 plus years ago. On the right there are what Morning Consult identified through their research. And in my opinion, a lot of these virtues about things like integrity, truthfulness, are timeless. And so what makes a good leader in the 21st century and what made a good leader in the first century are not vastly different. Um, but Sherry, talk to me a little bit about, you've done a lot of self-assessment as well in your career, and you've had to help other leaders assess themselves. Sometimes that the most difficult work you can do with the CEO is to help them see themselves more clearly. To me, it's fascinating that people in leadership often do not actually see themselves very well. And you have to learn how to be a mirror in a way where that person doesn't throw you out of the room. So you want to maintain the relationship, but you also need to deliver some of those hard
Harder
messages.
messages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I think it as a colleague and counselor in my roles, definitely courage is one of those areas that um, you you have to find kind ways to tell the truth. And there's a Gandhi quote is like, be truthful, be kind, and be brave or bold, be brave. And so I oftentimes need to you prepare for all of your meetings and you reflect on what you want the outcomes to be. And you need to say, hey, even if it's the CEO, this is what went really well. And these are some things that may not have landed. And or when you do this, be aware that this might be how people would interpret it. Because when you're the CEO, you need to constantly be reminded that you're like, you may feel like you're a pebble, but there's this ring of impacts once dropped into the water that is something that you have to be conscious of. And it doesn't only have to do with CEOs, it has to do with everyone who's in a position of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so realizing you can't just say exactly what you think, you need to you need to put it in a way that people will hear it. I remember I was interviewing for my job at Pfizer, and the I guess the executive recruiter said, so, well, Sherry, Pfizer's a really tough place. How do you think you're going to make it there? You seem like too nice a person. And I said, well, thank you. That's a nice compliment, but I'm like an iron fist with a velvet glove. I'll be able to tell them what I think. And I think that that's one of those, it's a good skill to have, because no matter who you're with, you have to say something in a way a person can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not be the person they can hear it from. And so having a broad enough network around you at work to be able to find ways to help address some of these challenges that a person or leader may be having, it's important to employ the other allies around you.
Yeah, I like this. There's courage, boldness, and I think truth. Was that the other one that you said Gandhi used?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I have a friend who says, tell the truth even if your voice shakes.
Yep.
And
Kindness, I think it was kindness.
kindness, yes.
Yes.
And that is I do think sometimes we use truthfulness as an excuse to be rude, or as an excuse to be inconsiderate of others. So, well, I was just telling the truth. Well, from your point of view, it's and if what you say causes resistance, or if what you say just bounces off of the people you're talking to, then you've just wasted everybody's energy. There's no positive outcome of moving people in a direction. I love your advice about preparing for every meeting and thinking about what you want that outcome to be. I mean, that's a lot of discipline.
Yeah, I think it's required, and I would say I aim to do that. I don't always do that. but I mean, I think it's particularly important if you have a difficult topic to address.
Mhm,
And so, at the time when George Floyd was murdered and companies were feeling
mhm,
obligated to start having a conversation around race
mhm,
that they had
mhm,
not had before,
mhm,
there was a lot of pressure to do this in the right way, in a way
mhm,
that a full organization would hear and receive.
mhm,
And the people who are kind of on target for that were, the HR heads and the communications heads, along with the CEO, and figuring out what's the right way to have that conversation.
mhm.
And so there were times where we had to have hard conversations, and also just self-reflective conversations, to understand all the different perspectives of employees and people at that time, and continuing on
Mhm.
to be able to address some of these really big interactable issues.
So yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with Milton Friedman's famous slash infamous statement that the purpose of business is to generate profits for shareholders, and that any other kind of purpose a business pursues is a form of authoritarianism, of taking the rights away from the voters, from the shareholders, because they were not in those meetings where the executives made a decision to do something like speak out, against racism. And so that's actually an irresponsible behavior on the part of corporate leadership, because the only thing they can count on is that all the shareholders want to see an increase in value of their shares. Um, how has that, is that critique still valid, and or how do you think about that?
Well, it's very interesting because I think the pendulum swung way too far to the left, and perhaps where I think that during the previous administration, a lot of executives felt the need to stand up for issues that we would expect our government leaders to be standing up for. But what's right and where a company needs to speak out are when there are issues that directly impact their workforce. So racism is an issue that directly impacts your workforce, but also where a company is planning to put its money where its mouth is, and actually do something about it. Just talking and speaking out can be flat promises,
Hmm.
but there needs to be action, and there needs to be accountability
Hmm.
whenever you're getting into some of these issues, so that they come back as authentic to both the workforce as well as the customer base. And if you live in that as the realm of your impact, I
Hmm.
think that's something that is it makes sense strategically to your business as the other point of alignment. And so those are good places to go. So
Hmm.
Zoetis, where I most recently worked, is an animal health company. And so we did a lot to support veterinarians and the education and the shortage of veterinarians, and giving
Hmm.
more people access to education, and including diversity of the profession, which is 90%, graduating 90% white women right now in the United
Wow.
States. So it's like finding the right place where business
Hmm.
can make an impact,
Hmm.
and where you can put your effort. So I think you said it before. It's that business and social good overlap, and
Yeah.
when that combination is in place, the opportunity is endless.
Yeah, and I also think you create competitive advantage. I worked for a medication management company, which was did training for pharmacists. And one of the smartest decisions they ever made is they gave away a subscription to their education newsletter to people who were in pharmacy school. So if you were in pharmacy school, you could get a free copy of the pharmacist's letter. And people got hooked on this monthly when they were young, and they carried it all the way through their career. So they started out where it was, they gave it away. Eventually they got a corporate sponsorship for it, but people maintained those subscriptions all the way into their retirement. And it started with that generosity, recognizing the generosity of, we should give this to people. We should give this to folks who need it. And then that develops a loving bond, which can last throughout an individual's working life. There's a really interesting story about a woman who brought, she was a designer at, I believe it's Adidas. She was a designer at Adidas. And she brought a suit against them for a hostile workplace. She's African-American, and Adidas was or is popular among African-Americans. They're a tremendously important constituent for that company. But what she recognized was that they only saw African-Americans as buyers. They didn't really understand them as individuals, or they didn't understand the cultural, I'd say, sensitivities or cultural touch points. And this was an organization that had, said, these are really important customers to us, but they still had a lot of blindness around that. And to me, that's an opportunity missed of someone comes forward in your organization and says, hey, we're getting this wrong. Being gentle there, being friendly, being truthful, having courage to have those conversations. And in order to have dialogue is a tremendous act of love in business. It's so hard to have dialogue about difficult issues because we don't hear each other. And anyway, I'll go on from there.
I mean, you have to leave room though for dissenting opinions.
Yes.
So, and that's where I think a lot of people, and I think even we've made mistakes before where what is right is different to everybody. And so you have to really step back and appreciate the individuals and know it's okay to disagree.
Totally agree with you. Right. I mean, democracy, one concept of democracy was thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And today, a lot of what we have is thesis. And there is no interaction of those two theses to create some synthesis of those ideas. So we sort of exist in our separate camps, each with our own set of beliefs that to be a member of my camp, you have to embrace all of my beliefs. And that makes it really hard to have dialogue. So to your point about the importance of dissenting opinions, the importance of allowing dissent. I had a colleague who used to talk about, he loved the concept of disagree but commit. And I do think that is an important concept in business, is that we don't all have to think the strategy is perfect, but we all have to be committed to it. And if you're undermining the strategy by making, constructive criticism, that after a while just becomes insubordination. So let's talk a little bit about what love looks like in business. And then we also have some time for, in fact, let's skip this right now and just see if we have any questions, because we're almost at the end. I'm going to remind you of my buddy Heraclitus, who says that character is destiny. You can use the 12 steps of product management or love in business to shape your character, and that can help form your destiny. And I'm also going to remind you about my buddy Margaret the Pug, co-founder of Fortune's Path, who recognizes that love is more than a lick in the face. So let's see if we have any questions from folks or comments that they would like to make before we close. And I'll see if I can get back to the Zoom. Sherry, it's been really, really fun having you. I appreciate the time that you've spent with me today.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and I can't thank you enough for being a member of my family. So
we should have disclosed that at the beginning.
That's exactly, probably, yes. Full disclosure, it was on your bio, but
okay.
People might have been able to figure it out. If you have any questions, go ahead and write those in now, and you can do that in the Q&A section. And this is one, someone wants to know, Sherry, who's the best boss you've had and why were they a good boss?
Wow, that's a great question. And I am not going to name a person. I don't know. I think I think that I've had a lot of great bosses, and they've been great to me for different reasons. I had my a boss at Ogilvy, and one day I was just in tears and I was just overwhelmed. And she basically taught me the lesson that perfection is not the way to success, and that sometimes good enough is okay. And I think I remember at the same time my husband was like, Merck was my client. He's like, Sherry, the whole of Merck shareholders are not on your shoulders. Like, put this into perspective. So like having the counterbalance of my husband was good. Um, but then there are other bosses that I have had, which encouraged my creativity, or built out or supported building my confidence, through went through hooking me up with different coaches at the different times, and that have really made a great value in helping to form who I am. So thanks for the question.
Yeah. This is another one that came in. How did you learn to recognize love is the center of business? So I'll speak for myself on that one. Business is a part of my life. I want love to be the center of my life. And so if I want love to be the center of my life, I can't exclude that from business, because I believe that the idea of that I have business and I have the rest of my life is wrong. The ancients didn't feel this way. They just felt that the expression of your character, whether it was in public life or in private life, it was the same character. It was the same life. And so that's why I choose to place love at the center of business. Sherry, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I did this exercise. I guess I was in my 30s, and I had one child. I was kind of feeling that motherly neglect. I wasn't succeeding at work or succeeding at being a mother because I was too busy trying to do both well. And I took some time to reflect on how did the different aspects of my life fit together around what I value. So in some ways, Tom landed love, but I kind of took it as an outside in approach. And so where do all those things overlap? So your spiritual life, your family life, your community life, your professional life, and how do those things come together to make you the whole? And where can you put those interests together so that you get to express and invest your time in what's most valuable to you? And so I think, and so where it comes out is, if you're really trying to make a difference in the world and with to every person that you meet, you're going to end up loving them. So
That's a great way to end. Sherry, thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you everybody who participated today. We'll do examine another one of the 12 steps in March, and we hope you join us for that.
that's great. Thank you. And thanks, Stephanie, for being online. That's great to see you. All right. Take care, Tom. Thank you so much. Have
Thank
a
you.
great weekend, everyone.